Are you writing a book right now on ethnic?
On multicultural. Well, it's a book called Other Solitudes, which looks at other than the French and English cultures in Canada, and looking at a range in terms of the age of writers, the when they arrived in Canada, whether they're first generation immigrants, second, third, fourth, and whether and the whole range from European to South American to Eastern, Far East, Near East, to West Indian, African, whatever. We've tried to get as wide a range as we possibly could. It's a series of interviews and short fiction.
And this is going to come out this year?
In September.
How did you, now this is, we'll get into the personal stuff, how did you get involved in the topics and issues that...
Two reasons. One did come right out of postmodernism. Yeah. And that was inevitable, I think, because one of the things that characterizes postmodernism is, that I didn't mention, is an interest in the different, the local, the particular, rather than the universal, which is a standard humanist concept, that we work with universals that have eternal value. This is quite the opposite, where one is interested in the local and the particular. And in a way, postmodernism was made possible by the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s, by feminism, which in some ways was enabled by that, and by subsequent other groups that have made us aware of difference within that universal culture that I certainly had been taught as an undergraduate, that I was studying. So that's part of my interest, was in the local and the different, which involves racial and ethnic differences from dominant cultures. The other is my own background, and despite having a very WASP name, my maiden name was Bortolotti, and having lost that in marriage, and I got married at a time when I didn't know women who kept their own maiden names, so that I took my husband's name. I went through a period of time where I realized I had lost the sign of my ethnic identity. And I've increasingly over the years, and I did do some of my graduate work in Italian, wanted to recuperate, to get back to that part. I'm second generation, so that I never learned Italian at home. It was something that I had to learn in university. And that was important to me to learn that. And so I've always had this interest, and in working on postmodernism and Canadian literature in particular, being aware that Canadian literature has always been a literature of immigration. Maybe largely British immigration, but it has been a literature of immigration. And then looking at my particular community, the Italian Canadian community, but also others. And lately I've been particularly interested in not just whether multiculturalism, as in this volume, is something that works, and that's one of the questions behind the volume. But also, in my own work on irony, how do different groups use ironies and to what ends?
Do we have any examples of that?
One of the curious things I found was that I looked at Italian Canadian and Ukrainian Canadian writers, because I wanted to get two groups that had been here for a fairly long period of time, see what happened. And I found writers who use ironies about absolutely everything except their own background. There's no ironizing of your immigrant parents. And I don't know whether what you find is a range that goes, and it's not a wide range, from nostalgia to the elegiac. But no irony. Lots of irony about everything else in our culture. But when it comes to that, a real limitation, except when dealing with stereotypes. And that's obviously, which is a playing ground for ironies, for playing against the stereotypes that one has been associated with. And there you do find it. But
isn't that sort of different from, say, Jewish Canadian or Jewish American?
Very.
Where there is a great deal of irony.
Yes. And a particularly self-deprecating kind of irony that has become almost a trademark. Yes, I thought that was very strange. And part of it may have to do with when the groups emigrated. I think this is one thing I found, that maybe with time you can ironize more. Irony has that distancing you were talking about, that it has that distancing ability and suggestion, and maybe it takes time. Maybe it takes another generation before one can ironize pain, which I think immigration is an experience of pain for a lot of people. It's not a wonderful, liberating thing. A lot of people don't come because they want to particularly, but because they have to. So that probably is part of it. But we also found that it wasn't just distance in the interviews, certainly, that we did. It wasn't just distance from time of immigration, but race. And it made a big difference whether you were a European or Latin American immigrant of Spanish background, and whether you were Black or Chinese. This made an immense difference in the response to immigration, and subsequently to their living in Canada and the kinds of ironies they're going to use when talking about it.